Okay then, we are going to kick off with the first of today's talks. Joining us here on the stage and coming back to Retcon for what, this has got to be your, is it second or third Retcon now?
It's our second one.
Second.
Yeah,
So
second.
joining us for the second Retcon. This is the team behind a number of the most significant retro computing documentaries of the last decade, including the extremely well-known, extremely successful Bedrooms to Billions series, the PlayStation Revolution, and most recently, the Rubber-Keyed Wonder, the documentary looking at the ZX Spectrum. So joining us today to tell us about those and their latest work, please welcome Anthony and Nicola Caulfield. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello there.
Hello.
We did not expect that we'd be on a stage in a large room like this. We thought we'd be off to the side like it was last time. So it's
Yeah. But it's lovely. It's very nice. Yes.
and we have no idea what we're going to say, so we are completely making this up as we go, just to get it out of the way straight away.
No, we are a little bit more organised than that. But
Are we? Right. So let's first of all kick off. We've got a film out at the moment about the ZX Spectrum, which probably there's a few people in this room that backed it into existence through our Kickstarter campaign. So thank you to anybody here that backed the film. We're going to start off by running the trailer for our new film at the moment. So let's do that.
My object is to find people's real needs, to develop products which are of real benefit to people in whatever way, and to do that at a price that they can afford to do for 10p what anyone can do for £1.
Sir Clive Sinclair, you knew who he was, some great British inventor, but I don't think we sort of realised at the time the significance of what he was innovating in and what it would lead to.
My father was always thinking about the next invention, new ideas. That was where his heart was.
So he wanted to come up with something completely new that everybody would adopt. That's really what his goal was, to have a product that everybody wanted and everybody needed.
Clive was an innovator. You need these people, they're the engines of industry. People that are prepared to take a risk, stick their neck out. And Clive Sinclair was a risk taker in the best way.
I think of him as a boffin who understood what was important to people and how he could bring the future into their lives at a decent price.
One of the strengths of Clive was that he was newsworthy. He was a personality. He was a bit of a maverick. People wanted to know, what was he going to say? What was he going to do next?
The Spectrum was there at the time when it was affordable for parents to say, yeah, we can stretch to that.
The Spectrum was ideal. You go to a shop, pick it up, you unbox it, you plug it in.
I thought it was the coolest thing I had ever seen.
The rainbow stripe on the bottom right, it's a thing of absolute beauty. And the Sinclair logo itself, the font, get out of town.
It was just so successful.
The amount of games that we used to get through was just incredible.
The games play really made the Spectrum the success that it was.
To me, it just made it possible to get into computing.
That's the Spectrum experience.
It's one of the few times that I dug my heels in and said, Clive, we're hiring her or I'm leaving.
When Clive was targeting those early adopters, innovators, he was hapless.
This was cheap, it was in everyone's houses, it was colour, beautiful.
It gave the tools of production to the hands of millions.
Thank you.
So that's our fourth film now, The Rubber-Keyed Wonder. And the reason why we decided to do The Rubber-Keyed Wonder was basically from our first film, From Bedrooms to Billions, where we got to a point in that film where we really wanted to go into detail about Sir Clive, but we couldn't because the film would have been about 10 hours long. It's long anyway, but it would have been a lot longer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we sort of, with the first movie, From Bedrooms to Billions, as Nicola said, 10 years old now, that deals with the story of the British games industry, which we really didn't know that story before we started making that film. So as we were making that original film 10 years ago, there were sort of things that we were noting. Okay, the transition from 8-bit to 16-bit, that's something we might need to come back to. Oh, the importance of the Amiga, the ZX Spectrum, the Commodore 64, they're all things that we might need to tell separate stories of at some point in the future. So the next film after From Bedrooms was about the Amiga, about the 16-bit explosion. Then we made a film on the PlayStation, and then obviously with the Rubber Keyed Wonder, we were able to go back to and tell the story of the rise of computing in the UK in the late 1970s. But you always learn something new when you're making any film. You have to kind of go into it almost forgetting everything you've learned before, because sometimes the story can sort of pull you around into different areas, or you learn things when you interview people, and then you have to make a note and then go and research that and think if it's something that's worth covering or exploring. And very often what you end up with at the end is quite different from what you actually originally intended. And I was actually talking to somebody recently that these types of documentaries, they're very different from how we started out making any of our films or anything that we ever used to do, because they're not a painting by numbers exercise, you know, where you can say, right, we're going to make it over 10 months and we're going to film these number of interviews and we're going to do this and move on, which is kind of the way it works with broadcast documentaries. You get a deadline, you get a budget, and off you go. With these films, they've been very much clumps of interviews, editing up what you've done, a bit more research, filming another clump of interviews.
There's lots of moving parts, isn't there? So the more people that we interview, the more we find out about the story, and then that sends us off in a different direction as to what we're going to be doing. But the Rubber Keyed Wonder, that changed so much because we were just going to do a film about the Spectrum, weren't we? Purely. It just started the Spectrum. But the more people that we interviewed, we found out much more of what Clive had done previous to that. So we thought we've got to include all of that. But we didn't realise, did we?
Yeah, and I think you then realise in order to establish the significance of the Spectrum, you've got to explain Sir Clive's backstory, where he came from, originally a journalist, you know, obviously a genius, pocket radios, and then eventually the pocket calculator, which I don't think people quite realise the significance of. I'm not saying you don't realise the significance of, but when we take things for granted of having iPhones and things in our pocket, even when you look at that original 1972 calculator that Clive invented, it still looks so good. And I think that was the other thing that surprises, is a lot of Clive's designs are fairly timeless in the fact that they are the industrial design that went into these objects looks so great, as well as them being technologically advanced. So you sort of look at it and think, okay, we've got to feature that. We must cover the ZX80, the ZX81, because it shows the progression of the computing. But what was interesting was when we came to the development of the Spectrum itself, because of the ZX80 and the success of the ZX81, Clive had sort of, I don't want to say lost interest, but kind of, we're just going to do a ZX82 colour. So let's get that 82 one out that's going to have colour on it. And that's kind of the way the ZX Spectrum was looked at initially, was effectively just a slight step up from the ZX81. So the engineering story behind the ZX Spectrum was in some ways not quite as remarkable as what came before. I'm not in any way belittling the Spectrum, by the way, but and you sort of get all this information, you sort of put it together, and then you've got to construct it so that people understand that hardware history. And hardware is always such a key component in game design, because obviously you get the innovations in further games. So we always knew we needed to cover game design in the film as well. And then what happened to Sinclair after it. So we made a film about 9 years ago called The Amiga Years, where that film had a hardware story that came to a certain point about the development of the Amiga, and then we needed to take it off to show what game designers did with that Amiga to make it so special. But in a funny sort of way, it was always in the back of my mind, as a punter, I would have kind of wanted to know what happened to the rest of Commodore. You know, because we kind of leave Commodore and then And that, funny enough, we're addressing that in our next film, but we'll come back to that later. So with the Rubber Keyed Wonder, we wanted to make it a more complete film. So you learn all these other things, significance of the Spectrum, what it did for the game development community, but also finishing off what happened to Sinclair. What happened, why did Amstrad buy the Sinclair brand, and all of those elements, and what did Amstrad do with the Spectrum after that, with the Plus 2 and everything else. So we realised there was a much more sort of complete story that we could tell. I'm going to come up for air for a sec now.
Thanks. I think the other interesting thing was how much Sir Alan Sugar was part of the story, which I didn't realise that either, did we? How Alan Sugar was buying parts from Sir Clive, you know, when Sir Clive was just selling little computer parts and everything.
That was in the 60s, wasn't it?
Yeah, so, and we did try to interview Alan Sugar, didn't we? But couldn't get him.
He lives about 5 minutes up the road from where we live. That doesn't mean we live in a rich area like Alan,
No.
but we live in a place called Barkingside, which is sort of a village at the bottom of the hill, and you've got Chigwell, which is where a lot of the rich people live, and that's where Alan's
But we
lives.
did consider going sitting outside his road. We'd be in our film, but we just could not get him, which I think's a shame, really, because it would have been nice to have him in there. But
You know, and maybe if Roland Perry's here, maybe he could have introduced us to him, perhaps. But we did. I mean, Alan is in the film through archive, and if anything, we kind of got that famous press conference between Sir Clive and Alan Sugar, where the handover happened, kind of tells that story quite well in the film. Yeah, how long have we... I just realised, actually, whether to make this...
could answer some questions.
Yeah, we could, because we're only on for half an hour, so we could just answer some questions, and if that's all right,
Hopefully
if anyone's got a question,
someone's
of
got
course.
a question.
By the way, I don't know, because there's no monitors this side, I don't even know if anyone can hear me. I can sort of hear my voice bouncing off that wall and coming back, so... Oh, it's good, okay. Oh, hello there. We have an Amiga tablecloth here.
In terms of archive, do you mean, or yeah, new material? Yeah. I think one thing that we really struggled with, actually, on the Rubber Keyed Wonder is the cost of archive. So we interviewed all these people, but trying to get hold of footage of Sir Clive and Alan Sugar and everything was really difficult, because a lot of that is owned by the BBC, and they charge a fortune for archive. And of course, we need to have archive to be able to tell that story. So
I think archive is a very key component, because archive is footage shot in the era that you're trying to cover. So over the last 5 years, the cost of licensing third-party archive has gone through the ceiling. During the pandemic, because a lot less actual filming went on, the need for archive programming went up. So the archive houses put their prices up, but then never put them back down again. So the archive cost for the Rubber Keyed Wonder was sort of nearly about £80,000. So just to give you some sort of idea,
it's a lot.
you're going to, and the BBC owned most of it, and they did us no favours, none whatsoever.
But I think something else we've started to add into our films now is doing like B-roll shoots. So where we had our intro, that's actually our daughter in the intro with a friend. And we thought we'll recreate what it looks like to be in a 1980s front room. So that looked very much like my front room. But it was funny, when we had this image of what that corner looked like in this particular museum that we went to, and we imagined it to be really big. When we got there, it was quite small, wasn't it? So we really had quite a limited space to do the filming in. But we liked that, and we thought we're going to introduce that more into our films now, so we can recreate certain parts, because it's cheaper than using archive.
Yeah, we actually used a track and dolly for that, so we were actually able to treat it like a proper studio shoot.
We got very excited by the track and dolly, didn't we?
And we were fascinated by the fact in the museum they had the same wallpaper that my mum and dad had in 1984. So, in fact, there was a hell of a lot of similarities to their, what they called old-fashioned front room, my front room.
Well, that carpet looked like my mum and dad's, which I set fire to when I was little.
So shooting B-roll, where you're recreating elements, is an option, which means you don't have to necessarily lean on archive so much. But archive is very important to us, and the research that goes into the archive is quite a lot, because when we first made From Bedrooms to Billions, the BBC had mislabeled a lot of anybody using a computer on their archive was listed as secretarial. So I was asking for things, anybody using computers. So we got some stuff, if you remember Saturday Superstore and some of the early 1980s Saturday morning programs, there were kids using Spectrums and Commodore 64s and BBC Micros. That was fine. But if you think of the whole catalogue of BBC programming through the 70s and 80s, anybody using a computer being listed in their archive as secretarial, because somebody typing onto a computer had been mislabeled in terms of it being like a typewriter. So it took about 18 months of going through endless Word documents and me requesting anything that had secretarial to then get the masters come in, and about 60% of it was people using computers. So we relabeled a lot of their archive, and I know that programming since has benefited from that relabeling. And that's part of an archive. I was an archivist for a long time, in a previous life, basically, back in our old programming days when we used to make a lot of music documentaries and things like that. And it was kind of a skill you learn where you think that might mean that, so I'll request it. And the BBC back then, even 10 years ago, was still using videotapes to supply their archive on. So we were having to run lots of time-coded archive. But there were some wonderful bits, like we discovered the assembly of the ZX80 at the end of a piece of archive that had been kind of forgotten about. So that we've used some of that in the Rubber-Keyed Wonder, but there's use of it. If anyone knows those films, there's a woman in a blue jumper with a big necklace assembling, hand-screwing components into the ZX80 board with no gloves or anything.
Another thing we didn't realise, we've got some footage of a schoolboy programming on the ZX80, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's Crispin Sinclair, which we didn't realise. And when we were interviewing him, he said, that's me in that footage.
And it wasn't listed either, was it? It didn't have his name.
Also, there's a photograph of a lady next to the little Micromatic.
Yeah.
And that is Grant's mum. And we didn't know that either. And that just came through an archive house,
Grant Sinclair being Sir Clive's nephew, who's obviously appears in the Rubber-Keyed Wonder. So we actually, going back to the Rubber-Keyed Wonder, we did have great support from the Sinclair family. So Grant and Crispin Sinclair in the film, and also Sir Clive's brother helped out, just from an archive point of view. He's not actually in the film, but we filmed at his house. So we did those interviews, and Phil Candy, who's the industrial designer that worked with Rick Dickinson for a long time, and also worked on the ZX Spectrum Next. And I believe Henrique's here. And the whole film as well itself was funded by effectively the public. So it's a crowdfunding campaign where we bring in, and crowdfunding campaigns, at least in their essence, is where people are taking part in the creation of it. So they're having their name on it, and they're receiving updates and lots of early clips and photographs and behind-the-scenes information as the film progresses through to eventually being finished, which is usually longer than we say it will take in the first place. But we do always get there in the end.
Yeah. It's only two of us.
Has anybody got any other questions, by the way?
Another thing with regard to the archive, it was quite nice to have Sir Clive's voice throughout the film, because obviously we couldn't interview him. So that's quite nice that we managed to find lots of stuff where he's talking.
He couldn't refuse to be in it at that point, could he?
No. Yeah.
Does anybody have another question? If you call it out, we'll shout it out over the mic. Richard?
I think it's a fantastic film, and I'm glad I've had a chance to get to know you through it. I just want to find out, what's your favourite part of the whole process?
That's a good question, actually.
Well, I think my favourite part is when we're editing. I love the editing part of it. I mean, I really like doing all the interviews and everything, but I think it's when we've got it all there in the computer and we start cutting it together. I love that. And because all our films are based on what people are saying, it's no voiceover, nothing from us. It's lovely when it just starts to work and it starts to come alive. And then when we get the archive in as well, and
the archive's the biggest headache. I know we've talked a lot about archives, I don't want to go on about it too long, but my favourite part is probably editing the montages. So with the game footage to music, because Nicola will leave gaps. and I'll come in and that's where I'll sort of fill in those. I mean, you do edit montages as well, but they're the bits that if Nicola will say, we need these bits filled with, and she'll leave notes on the edit line and say it needs to be 82 to 83 games, or 84, we need to show. So there's a lot of thinking that goes into the games that we show. In fact, they're never just randomly thrown in there. We tend to find that one game links into another. We try and do it so that there's a logical cut, or the games that we show in a little cluster, there's a reason why those games are there. So it's very, very rare that I don't think we ever throw games in just like that. There'll be either because it's date order or chronologically or something like that. So that's always fun to do. Interviews are the hardest thing to do because we take a lot of time on how we frame and shoot. So we follow old school filming techniques. So we've always had this belief, and apologies if people have heard us talk before and we've said this before, but when you're watching a film with lots and lots of video game footage in it, you like to have, your eyes need the rest. So when you see interviews that are really well shot and you're not using any unnecessary effects in those, so flashy name straps or something like that, they all use up your eyes. So if you're watching a properly filmed shot that's where you're using a real lens and everything is as it should, it's a nice sort of breather, and then you're able to listen and watch that interview better, and then your eyes are ready for the electronic gaming footage that you're going to get at some point, or lots of it.
Yeah, I mean, some interviews can take an hour and a half to set up because we want it perfect. So, but yeah, I enjoy that side as well. I mean, I do enjoy every element, but it is just the editing is definitely top.
Well, you would remember, Richard, because when we filmed at Henrique's offices, we turned his offices upside down just to look like a normal, and that's half of it, is to make something look normal, you have to turn it upside down and light specific bits of the walls and.
Well, we were trying to get twinkly lights behind you on that tree. Yeah.
I mean, Rob Hubbard had said to me on numerous occasions that people think that he's interviewing From Bedrooms to Billions, which we were incredibly lucky to get that shot, because it was the worst hotel in the world. It was a hotel in Hull. It was belting down with rain, so the room, there wasn't. You walk around and you're looking for a shot all the time. Where can I frame this up? And he was waiting patiently in the front. This is a Spectrum tour, and I'm talking about a Commodore 64 Legend. But he was sitting in the foyer, and we were going around this hotel looking for any angle we could find to frame him. And in the end, I remember leaning back into him to apologise about keeping him waiting, and it was like, that's it. And he was sitting in the foyer of the reception of this hotel, and we just shot it there. But Rob says people think he's in some sort of Swiss chalet, because there was just this bit of wood behind him that looked sort of an illusion of it being at some very...
And that lovely pottery.
Almost like a Bond villain's out. You know, it was something about the background behind him, but trust me, if you just, in reality, if you turned your head to the left or to the right, it would have been the most drab wallpaper and lighting you could imagine. So we were lucky in that.
There was also a wedding that day, so we literally had him for an hour, and then the guests started arriving, and we're like, oh God, we've got to wrap this up. And a fly kept appearing as well, didn't it?
Must have been a Sid Chip fan or something, that fly. It wouldn't leave him alone. But, you know, so the filming is always a complicated element. It involves a director of photography, lighting, sound recording, all of the things that go into it. But as Nicola said, once you've got all those components back and you're editing it, that's when the real arguments can start.
I win.
Any other questions?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Of all your films, Nicola and Anthony, which one is your favourite and why?
I suppose it would be wrong to not say the latest one, wouldn't it, really?
The Rubber Keyed Wonder's my favourite because I had a Spectrum when I was growing up, so I love it. And I love everything about Sir Clive Sinclair, so I definitely say the Rubber Keyed Wonder. I like all the others, but that's definitely my favourite.
I'd have to say the same thing because you kind of, sorry, I think I'm getting a bit of feedback here. Everything you do, you kind of want to improve on it the next time. And even when I look at From Bedrooms to Billions, there's 1,000 things I want to change in it and fix in it. Same with the Amiga years, and which we're now doing with the new Amiga film. But I think that from Bedrooms to Billions, Rubber Keyed Wonder feels like a complete film. And I'm very pleased the fact that we can tell the Sinclair story, that we cover pretty much all the variations of the Spectrum, the ZX Spectrum, and also the Spectrum Next. That was wonderful to be able to get the Spectrum Next in there. And also, I think the fact that we got the film shown at the IMAX was quite amazing. And it wasn't something we paid for. They approached us, and they felt that and we were quite blown away by the whole thing. The idea of premiering this movie at the IMAX was just astonishing. And they want us back with the Amiga. So we're thinking, to do something with the Amiga at the IMAX in the 40th anniversary of the Amiga, that would be quite amazing. So we're working hard to get that film finished.
Yeah, I think also with our films, the way in which we make them's evolved, and it kind of, I think with the Rubber Keyed Wonder, it just felt like we got everything kind of right in terms of being able to do B-roll, recreating the front room. There was just lots of little things that we thought, yeah, we've been wanting to do that for years, do separate filming, recreating scenarios and that. So yeah, I think in terms of filmmaking, it's our best and definitely my favourite with the Spectrum. Yeah.
There's also been some really nice sort of spin-off elements of the Rubber Keyed Wonder in the fact that we've ended up getting involved in there being an official game, and that was all just an amazing coincidence, meeting Lee at Lee Chop Stevenson. The game's actually over there in the corner. And then we had the mad idea of, because our son had composed some music for the film, and we wanted obviously our son's music to get out there, he wrote a wonderful song for the intro of the film called Time is a Precious Thing. And it just fit the intro of the film so perfectly. So we did a soundtrack vinyl, which we're in the process of making now, with the idea where the last track on the album is a loadable game, which hasn't been done for 40 years. So we've had some fun with Sony getting the test pressings in, and I was starting to get that heart-dropping feeling of, this isn't going to load. And they told me it would, but fortunately, it's all down to frequencies, and it's solved. And I did a video of it the other day of actually proving it could be loaded from record vinyl. But you sort of you pinch yourself a bit and think, wow, so many little things have come out as a soundtrack, as a game. It showed the film at the IMAX. People seem to really enjoy the film, and that's all you ever really want. You are creating entertainment. You don't really. The encyclopedic elements of people learning stuff from the films is great, but you do want to entertain as well, and people have that sort of feeling at the end of the film that they've enjoyed their experience.
I think there was that human element as well, having the story of Sir Clive Sinclair. We'd never really focused on anyone to that depth before, so that was really interesting to do.
Because you would keep saying, when we were working on the film, you kept saying, this is the Clive Sinclair story, this is the Clive... We've got to stay on that storyline. And we did.
Yeah.
And we managed to keep the film to around 2 hours. It's actually shorter than... It's 2 hours 20 is the...
Yeah.
But the end credits, because of all the backers in it, the end credits go on for something like 12 minutes. So it's a little bit like the end of Tron, with all the credits going up at the end. But they help fund the film into existence, so they've got to be in there.
Yeah.
And I thought that it's one of those things. I mean,
yeah.
When you back a project and you have your name on it, and 10 years later, there's people who back from Bedrooms to Billions that still say they see their name in the end and they're really proud they were part of it, and that makes it feel more of a community thing, that people have backed something and it happened, and they wouldn't get made otherwise. We wouldn't be able to get finance for these films in the traditional route, and we did try. We went to the BFI and said, look, Clive Sinclair, this is an important chapter in British history. Applied for the funding. We've applied every film we ever do, we apply, and we never get funding, so you've got to find another way. You have to,
We get there. Yeah.
Now that the films are made, is there any possibility of getting it shown on the BBC to get it out to a wider audience because it's made already, or is there some kind of reason why that couldn't happen? I've seen documentaries on, the punk movement and things like that, and it seems like computing in the UK is obviously...
I'm so sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Whether it could be made put onto the BBC.
Oh, yeah.
We do have a distributor for the Rubber Keyed Wonder, and they have approached the BBC, but they will turn around and say it's quite niche, which is really frustrating because there's a lot of stuff you'd watch on different channels. You think, well, that's quite niche. If I'm not into art, then is that classed as niche? Yeah. Yeah. So we continue to try, because now it's complete. It's less of a risk, I guess, because they could just buy it. But
our distributor believes that if the film continues to sort of it's finding an audience every day. It seems to be we're getting more and more sort of people writing, and it seems to be picking up a lot of momentum, the film, at the moment, which is kind of, we're very, very into the Amiga at the moment. Sorry, I know I keep bringing up the Amiga, but it's because this film was finished last year, so it's kind of strange because everything we're doing at the moment is different. So talking about this is sometimes strange, but we are getting a lot of momentum with the Rubber Keyed Wonder at the moment, and the distributor said, I think this is going to end up on the BBC at some point, because they'll kind of feel, if it was going to be anywhere, because there's so much BBC footage in the film, it feels a natural fit. But
I mean, they did Micro Men, and that's, so we were thinking, yeah, they'll probably go for this, but yeah, we've suggested all of that, and because obviously they may want to cut the film down as well, so we said you can do that. Which, I mean, we've sold some of our films into ZDF before in Germany, and they've re-edited it, which is quite normal. We're fine with that.
Netflix, if anyone remembers, had From Bedrooms to Billions on it for over 2.5 years, and it picked up a huge fan base on Netflix. So whereas Netflix, in this instance, wouldn't even watch this. The guy there is, it's crime. All they want is, at the moment, actually I'm watching their crime documentary, so I can't complain, but at the moment Netflix are focused more on crime. They don't want, and also because they produced the series, they did a game series, didn't they, a couple of years ago? I'm trying to remember the name of it now. Yeah, something like that, yeah. And so they kind of think they've got gaming covered. But again, if we keep, it keeps building a momentum, who knows what will happen, but hopefully it will just find its audience.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
5 minutes. Right, we've had the 5 minute hook. So we've got to build the momentum for Ian Lee. Let's get things really, really hot. Right, another question from anybody?
We can chat. Yeah.
Looks like we're filling in the air, but does anybody want to hear about? One thing I will say, just if we've got 5 minutes, we've also started producing the film. One of the slight problems we have, we are only a two-person team, though we do obviously we do bring people in, like we have certain professionals that we bring in for audio mixing or colour grading, because there's a lot of other components when you're making a film. You have somebody that comes in for 5 days and they colour grade the film. So they just sit there and that's their role. Or you send off the soundtrack for it to be mixed. So the whole process can be a 2-year, sometimes 3-year exercise. So that, from our perspective, we wanted to try and have more products out there that could and we found that our audience, you get the hardcore hardware people, that's quite good, hardcore hardware, people, that to them it's all about the hardware, and you get other people that couldn't care less about the hardware, it's just games, that's it, just games, and you get that mixture of a bit of both. So we came up with this idea of this thing called the, I told you, Classic, it's terrible, it's still not stuck in my mind, Classic Game Insights, where if you're just interested in game design, we've produced a Blu-ray of like 14 or 15 specially created individual short films of varying length that cover specific games. So we've just released one on the Amiga. So you've got games like Frontier and Robocop 3 and Epic. And so the idea being is that you can learn, you get these deep dive segments. There's one on the Commodore 64 one we're doing now, where there's an hour Paradroid documentary, but then there might be a 10-minute one on Sacred Army of Interior. So they're of varying length, but they seem to be going down quite well. And we can sort of put those out in between the movies, and it sort of helps supplement our income a little bit as well, because they're a bit like shorter books almost.
Yeah. I think one of the things we find is we've got so much footage. When we interview someone, it might be 3 or 4 hours, and really going into every single game that they've done. So we're like, well, none of that footage is being seen, because we can't put all the game making ofs in the films, because it just wouldn't work. It'd just be too long. So we thought, well, we could do these self-contained Blu-rays or digital downloads. So that's what we're looking at now, going back through our archive and releasing all these stuff that's focusing. It is primarily games.
Yeah, but it all gets edited up properly, and each film has its own individual soundtrack, so it has its own feel. It's like, so there might be 15 films on a 3-hour Blu-ray of varying length, all with a different pacing and all with and they kind of start, we called them spotlights originally, but now we sort of thought, no, we can do these and then they'll service people that are into just games. But every so often when you interview somebody as well, like we interviewed a gentleman called Gerard Bucas last week. We've been after him for years. Suddenly out of the blue, we got a message and we filmed him in Maastricht last Thursday. He's the former Vice President of Engineering at Commodore. He told us a story about the Amiga 300 we've never heard before, ever. I've never seen it on any Amiga sites or anything. So I thought, okay, I think we got a first for this film. And we're not telling you what it is now either. We're out to 2 minutes. But we sort of thought that's a spin-off in its own right, because if that's true, that's a deliberate destruction of a brand that was selling, you know, of what happened with the A500 after that. So we'd never heard of it being a deliberate action. It was, we thought it was just incompetence, but...
You're letting little bits out.
Yeah, I'll just let a little bit out. But yeah, that's another story. But it's, but when you, like Federico Fagin, the creator of the Z80 chip, appears very briefly in this film, but his interview was just under 4 hours. So we managed to cover his entire story of Silicon Valley, the creation of, obviously, all his work creating the first ever microprocessor, all of that. So we know at some point, and because we've also interviewed Chuck Peddle, we know that one day we'll be able to do something that can look at Silicon Valley. So we've got stuff for the future. We always film in 6 or 8K as well, so that we know we can future-proof our stuff and produce things at a later date. So I think we're probably out of time now. I don't know. Yeah. Hopefully we're entertaining. We haven't lost many of the audience, but
no,
thank you so much.
Sing. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Just stay there for a sec, we should have a photo. Our next talk will be coming up in 5 minutes, so don't stray too far away. We'll be starting at 12:15. Thank you very much.